For 30 years, the newspapers had called her the Wicked Widow. She had read the first article the morning it appeared in the winter of 1994, 3 months after August died, sitting at the small table by the window in the penthouse where she still lived, and where she had always taken her morning coffee. The phrase had been used without apparent irony, as though it were simply descriptive, as though the question of whether it was accurate had been settled before anyone had thought to ask it. She had finished her coffee and gone downstairs to the front desk to begin her morning rounds. She had been doing this for 30 years. Marguerite Delacroix was 72 years old, and she moved through the lobby of Hôtel Delacroix the way water moves through a landscape it has shaped over time, without apparent effort, following channels that had become natural through long use. She knew the names of every person who worked in this building, and she knew which of the third-floor rooms had a radiator that knocked in cold weather, and she knew that the light in the east corridor went amber in the late afternoon, in a way that guests found beautiful without knowing why. She had been a receptionist here when she met August. That was 34 years ago. He had been 62 and she had been 38, and the world had drawn whatever conclusions it chose to draw from that arithmetic, and she had stopped caring about the conclusions before most people had finished drawing them. August had seen something in her that he said he had not seen in anyone else in 40 years of running hotels. He said she saw the building as alive. He was right, she did. The boardroom was on the 14th floor, which was the floor she visited least because the 14th floor was Philippe's territory and had been since August named him chairman, a decision August had made not because Philippe was the right person, but because he was the eldest, and because August had believed at the time that responsibility might reshape a person. He had been wrong about that which he had acknowledged to Marguerite in the last months of his life, with the particular honesty of a man who no longer has reasons to avoid the truth. She took the elevator to 14 at 9:55. The document case she carried was old, the leather gone soft with age, the clasp requiring a particular pressure to open that her fingers knew without thinking. Inside was a document she had carried to 3 previous confrontations with Philippe, each time returning it to the penthouse safe, without having needed to use it waiting for the confrontation that would require its full deployment. She understood from the materials Gabriel had placed under her door the previous evening that this was that confrontation. The contract on Philippe's table would sell Delacroix Hospitality Group in its entirety to the Hartford Corporation, an acquisition firm whose hospitality portfolio consisted exclusively of properties that had been converted to luxury residential development within 4 years of purchase. 1,200 people worked in the Delacroix hotels. Marguerite knew a significant number of them by name. The boardroom door was not locked. She opened it and walked in. Philippe was at the head of the table with Sébastien to his right, and Colette at the far end, and there were 4 other people she recognized as Hartford representatives, and 2 she identified as legal counsel, and they all looked at her, with the various expressions of people who have been surprised by the arrival of someone they did not expect, and are rapidly recalculating. Philippe stood. "You weren't invited," he said. "I don't require an invitation," Marguerite said. She crossed to the table and set the document case down and opened the clasp with the pressure her fingers knew. "I require a signature. Specifically, I require mine, which you do not have." She placed the deed on the table. 30 years of mornings, 30 years of coffee in the lobby, and names learned and a building tended the way you tend something you love. 30 years of newspaper articles and social invitations that stopped arriving, and conversations that ended when she entered rooms. August had known it would cost her this. He had told her so in the letter she had read so many times that she no longer needed to unfold it to see the words. She looked at Philippe across the table, across 30 years of his certainty that she would eventually leave, or eventually sell, across his absolute confidence that patience and pressure would dissolve whatever it was that kept her in this building. She smiled. It was the smile of a woman who had been waiting for 30 years and had arrived. The keeper of the flame. The financial news ran at 7 in the morning. Marguerite had been awake since 5, which was her habit, had made her coffee in the small kitchen of the penthouse, the way she always made it ground from the same beans the hotel used in its restaurant, because August had said once that a person should drink the same coffee in their home that they served their guests, and she had never seen a reason to disagree. She was standing at the window with her cup when the segment began. Philippe was in a conference room somewhere, the kind of conference room that exists specifically to be photographed, with the city visible through floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, and the Hartford Corporation's representatives arranged on either side, in the careful composition of a transaction that wants to look inevitable. He was wearing the charcoal suit he wore for occasions he considered significant, which Marguerite recognized because she had been observing Philippe Delacroix for 30 years with the attention that proximity and the absence of affection tends to produce. He said the words new era. He said strategic partnership. He said the Delacroix legacy would be honored in the next chapter of growth. Marguerite watched him say these things. Sébastien was to Philippe's left, which was where Sébastien had always positioned himself relative to his brother, close enough to share the frame, and far enough to maintain the distinction between primary and secondary. He nodded at appropriate intervals. He had the expression of a man who has spent considerable time calculating whether a decision is correct, and has arrived at the answer he preferred, rather than the answer the calculation produced. The segment lasted 4 minutes. A financial analyst appeared afterward to discuss the valuation and called it an aggressive but defensible multiple, and said the Hartford Corporation had a strong track record of extracting value from legacy hospitality assets. Extracting value? Marguerite turned off the television. She had known this was coming in the specific way that you know weather is coming when you have lived in a place long enough to read its signals. Philippe had been moving toward this for 3 years. She had watched the approach, the way you watch something moving across a field toward you with full attention and without the ability to stop its movement only to prepare for its arrival. The preparation had been made 30 years ago. A knock at the penthouse door, 2 short and 1 long, which was Gabriel's knock, had been Gabriel's knock for 20 years since he had become general manager and had established the habit because he said the penthouse deserved a particular kind of announcement. She said, "Come in." And Gabriel Rousseau was 61 years old and had been in this building for 40, had started as a busboy in the restaurant when he was 19, and had worked every position in the hotel that a person could work before August had given him the general manager's role 14 years ago on the grounds that he was the only person who understood the building's moods as well as August himself. He was a large man with the specific gentleness that large men sometimes develop, and he had been Marguerite's closest friend for the better part of 3 decades, in the particular way of 2 people who share a devotion to the same thing. He came in without his usual composure. She recognized the quality of his disturbance, had seen it before, in people who have encountered information they had intellectually anticipated and emotionally not prepared for. "It's real," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. He sat down in the chair across from her, the chair that had always been his chair in this room, and he looked at the television she had turned off. The Hartford Corporation, he said, converts properties. That is what they do. They acquire hotels with brand recognition, and they spend 18 months removing everything that made the brand worth recognizing, and then they sell the units to private buyers. He said this in the tone of someone who has researched a subject and found it worse than they hoped. There are former staff from their last 3 acquisitions who have started advocacy organizations. "I know," Marguerite said. 1,200 people, Marguerite. He almost never used her first name. When he did, it meant he was speaking to her without the buffer of his professional role. Including people who have been here for 30 years, including people whose children work here now. She thought about the names she knew, the names she had learned because August had told her early on that knowing names was not a courtesy, it was a practice. It was the daily act by which a hotel remained a community rather than becoming a transaction. She had continued the practice after August died because it was the right practice, and because the doing of it had kept her connected to the reason she had stayed. She had stayed because August asked her to. She had also stayed because after enough years of morning coffee in the lobby and names learned and the particular quality of a building that has been cared for over time, the staying had become its own reason. Gabriel looked at her. "They don't know they're about to lose their jobs," he said. "The staff. They watched the news this morning and they heard legacy and new chapter and they went to their stations and they're working." He paused. "Maria at the front desk has been here 22 years. She's putting her daughter through nursing school." Marguerite set her coffee cup down. She crossed to the window that looked not at the city, but down into the lobby, the interior window that August had designed into the penthouse, specifically so that the person living in it could see the hotel's life below. It was 7:40 in the morning, and the lobby was in its morning configuration, the light coming through the east-facing doors in long, warm angles across the marble floor, the front desk staffed and the concierge at his post, and 3 guests checking out, and a family arriving early, their children looking up at the ceiling with the open-faced wonder of people encountering something larger than they expected. She watched this for a moment. August had watched it from this window. He had stood here many mornings in the last year of his life when he was not well enough to go downstairs and had watched the lobby with the expression of a man confirming that the thing he had built was still what he had intended it to be. She touched the frame of the window. Behind her on the small table beside the sofa was a photograph of August taken in this lobby, the photograph she had kept in the same position for 30 years. August in his 60s, standing at the center of the marble floor, looking at the camera with the expression that was characteristic of him, in photographs slightly amused by the fact of being photographed, more interested in what was happening around him than in the image being made. She turned from the window. "They will not sell," she said. "Not this, not the way they intend to sell it." Gabriel looked at her with the attention of someone who has known her long enough to understand that when she speaks with this particular quality of certainty, it is not the certainty of hope. "What do you have?" he said quietly. She looked at him for a moment. "August gave me something," she said, "before he died. Something Philippe has spent 30 years trying to acquire 6 times by my count, each time with a different price, and the same expectation that I would eventually accept." She walked to the bedroom. The safe was behind the wardrobe, which was not hidden so much as it was placed where it had always been placed in the location August had chosen when the penthouse was configured in 1988, before Marguerite had lived here, because August had known even then that the penthouse required a place for things that needed to be kept. She opened it with the combination that was the date of the hotel's founding, which August had considered appropriate. Inside, wrapped in dark velvet that had aged to a deep charcoal, was a document case. She did not open it. She placed her hand on the velvet surface and stood for a moment in the quiet of the bedroom, with the sounds of the hotel coming through the floor below her, the living sound of a building in its morning operations. August had said in the last conversation they had that was fully coherent, "You are the only one who sees it the way I see it." He had meant the hotel. He had also meant something larger than the hotel. She had told him she understood. She had kept her word for 30 years. "Tomorrow," she said to the room, to the photograph on the bedside table, to the man she had loved who had trusted her with the most important thing he had. "Tomorrow is when it matters." She closed the safe. In the lobby below, the morning continued its work. The memory came the way it always came, not gradually but completely the way certain memories do when they have been kept intact by the precision of their importance. October 1994. The penthouse in the afternoon light. August had wanted the curtains open, which surprised her because he had been sensitive to light in the final weeks. She had opened them without asking why, and the October sun had come in across the floor and across the bed, with the particular quality of autumn light in that city, warm and lateral and carrying the specific gold of a season in the process of ending. He was thinner than she had ever seen him. This was the fact she returned to when she thought about those last weeks, not the illness itself, not the medical details, but the specific fact of Auguste Delacroix, who had been a large presence in every room he had ever occupied, reduced to something that occupied less space than she had believed possible, while still being entirely, unmistakably himself. His eyes had not changed. That was the other fact. Whatever the illness was taking, it had not taken the quality of his attention, which remained what it had always been, focused and direct and slightly amused by everything it encountered. Etienne Moreau was standing near the door. He had been August's attorney for 30 years, which meant he was one of the few people in August's life who had known him before the success, before Hotel Delacroix, became what it became, before the name Delacroix meant something in the way that certain names come to mean something. He was 65. Then a compact man with reading glasses he wore, pushed up on his forehead, and a habit of absolute stillness that Marguerite had come to understand was not restraint, but attention. He held a document case against his chest, and he looked at her with the expression of someone who knows what is about to happen and has prepared himself for the weight of witnessing it. Auguste said her name. She moved her chair closer to the bed. He did not speak immediately. He looked at her in the way he had always looked at her, with the full attention that she had found remarkable from the beginning, from the first conversation they had had in the lobby of this hotel, when she was the receptionist and he was the owner, and he had stopped at the desk not to give instructions but to ask her what she thought of the new lighting in the East Corridor. She had told him honestly. He had listened as though her answer mattered. She had gone home that evening understanding that she had been looked at differently than she had ever been looked at, and not knowing what to do with that understanding. He said, "Etienne." Etienne brought the document case to the bed and opened it and removed a folder and placed it on the blanket between them. She looked at the top page. The header was in the formal type of legal documents, heavy and black. Deed of ownership. Hotel Delacroix. The date was that day's date. Her name was in the granting clause, Marguerite Vos Delacroix, in the language that meant the recipient rather than the giver. She looked at Auguste. "Why me?" she said. He turned his head toward the window. Below in the lobby, she could see through the interior window. Philippe and Sebastian were standing with a man she recognized as a real estate consultant, the kind brought in to assess properties for sale. Philippe was pointing at something, a wall, a section of floor, speaking with the emphatic certainty of a man describing a problem and its solution. Sebastian had a document of his own folded back to a page of numbers. Colette was sitting on the lobby bench near the fountain. She was not looking at her brothers. She was looking at the fountain, the one Auguste had commissioned in 1971, the one that had been in the lobby since the hotel opened. She was 22 years old, and she had the expression of someone watching something they are not sure they will be able to keep watching. Auguste watched his children for a moment. Then he looked back at Marguerite. "Because they see what it produces," he said. "You see what it is." She understood what he meant. She had always understood what he meant about the hotel, which was part of what he had meant when he said she was the only one who saw it the way he saw it. To Philippe and Sebastien, the building was a mechanism for generating a number, a very large and successful mechanism, one they had the intelligence to maintain and the ambition to expand, but a mechanism, something that existed to produce an output. Marguerite had never been able to see it that way. She saw the marble floor that Auguste had sourced from a quarry in Portugal because the color was exactly what he had imagined, and nothing else would do. She saw the fountain Colette was looking at, which had been designed by an artist Auguste had met at a dinner and had commissioned on the basis of a single conversation. She saw the East Corridor with its afternoon light, which was not accidental, but designed the windows placed at angles Auguste had worked out himself, with an architect over 3 months to produce exactly that quality of illumination at exactly that time of day. She saw a building that had been made with love, which is a different kind of making from construction, and which produces a different kind of thing. Auguste said, "I am going to tell you the conditions." He told her. She listened without interrupting, which was her practice, had always been her practice. She listened completely before she formed a response, because she had learned that most people form their responses before they have finished listening, and therefore respond to what they expected, rather than to what was said. The deed would transfer Hotel Delacroix, the original building, to her sole ownership. The transfer would include the trademark and brand rights to the Delacroix name as applied to the flagship property. She could not sell it. She could not mortgage it. She could not transfer it to any other party, including any member of the Delacroix family. The restriction ran for 50 years from the date of signing. The brand licensing agreement, which Etienne would explain in detail, meant that the other properties in the Delacroix portfolio operated under the name on the basis of their relationship to the flagship. If the flagship was removed from that relationship, the license terminated. The other properties would have 90 days to rebrand. She would have no claim on the profits of the other properties. She would have no seat on the board. She would have no authority over decisions made by Philippe and Sébastien and Colette in the management of the broader company. She would have this building, and she would have the key. When he finished, she sat for a moment. "They will hate me," she said. "Yes," he said. "They already consider me an interloper. This will confirm everything they believe about me." She paused. "Philippe will tell the press I manipulated you. He will say I took advantage of your illness." "Yes," Auguste said. "He will? And you still want me to do this?" He reached for her hand. His grip was not what it had been, but the intention of it was the same quality of deliberate contact that he had always used, as though touch was a thing he considered carefully. "I want you to do this," he said, "because you are the only one who will actually do it. Philippe would sell the restriction out from under itself within 5 years. Sébastien would find a financial instrument I haven't thought of. Colette does not have the will for the fight." He looked at her. "But you, Marguerite, you will stand in the lobby every morning and drink your coffee and know every name, and you will be here in 30 years when they finally try to do the thing I have always known they would try to do, and you will stop them." "You are very certain of me," she said. "I have been certain of very few things in my life," Auguste said. "The hotel and you." She looked at the document. She thought about what 30 years of being the wicked widow would cost. She had not yet lived, it could not fully imagine it, but she was not naive about the shape of what was coming. The name-calling was the least of it. The financial pressure, the legal challenges, the social isolation, the specific daily experience of being a person whom an entire extended family and their associated world considered an enemy, these were not abstractions. They were the texture of a life she was being asked to choose. She picked up the pen. She looked at Auguste for a long moment. "I won't disappoint you," she said. She signed. Etienne brought the notary seal and pressed it to the document with the deliberate motion of someone who understands that what they are doing is final, and the red seal went down onto the paper, and the document became the thing it had been designed to be, the instrument of a plan 30 years in the making, the key that Auguste had decided only Marguerite could be trusted to hold. Outside the window in the lobby below, Philippe was still pointing at things. He had no idea what had just happened in the room above him. He would spend the next 30 years trying to find out. The first article appeared in February 1995, 4 months after Auguste died. Marguerite read it at the small table by the window where she still read everything with her morning coffee in the particular light of a February morning that did not flatter anything it touched. The journalist had spoken to Philippe, which was evident from the framing, and to 2 unnamed sources who described Marguerite as a former hotel employee who had cultivated a relationship with the founder during his final illness and had used that relationship to acquire assets that rightfully belonged to his children. The phrase used was predatory companionship. She finished the article and finished her coffee and went downstairs to begin her morning rounds. This established the pattern for the 30 years that followed. 1995. The first article. Philippe's press offensive conducted through intermediaries and unnamed sources in the way of a man who understood that direct attacks could be litigated and indirect ones could not. The phrase wicked widow appeared for the first time in a society column in November of that year, attributed to no one already behaving like a name that had always existed. Marguerite did not respond. Auguste had not asked her to respond. He had asked her to stay. She stayed. 1998. A business magazine ran a profile under the headline, "The Woman Who Won't Leave 4 Pages," with photographs of Marguerite in the lobby, in the penthouse in the hotel garden, each image composed to suggest a person clinging to something that did not belong to her. The journalist had requested an interview. She had declined. The article described her refusal as telling. Philippe was quoted extensively. He used the words tragic and misguided and characterized his father's decision in the last months of his life as the product of diminished capacity. The article noted that no court had found evidence of diminished capacity. It did not give this fact equal weight with Philippe's characterization. Gabriel had brought her the magazine. She had read it in the same chair with the same coffee and had set it aside and asked him how the new kitchen equipment was settling in, because there had been complaints from the breakfast service about the egg station, and she wanted to know if the adjustment had resolved it. He had looked at her for a moment before answering. "You're not going to say anything about it," he said. He meant the magazine. "What would I say?" she said. "That I disagree. Philippe knows I disagree. The journalist knows I disagree. Agreement or disagreement is not the question. The question is whether I am still here." She was still here. 2003, the first lawsuit. Philippe's attorneys filed a challenge to the deed transfer on the grounds of undue influence, arguing that Marguerite had exploited August's physical and mental deterioration to secure a transfer of assets that August would not have made in full health. The case was heard over 4 months. Etienne Moreau, who was 74 by then and had reduced his practice to a small number of clients he considered worth his remaining time, represented Marguerite with the focused intensity of a man settling an account. He produced August's medical records from the final year of his life, including assessments from 2 independent neurologists who had examined August at intervals during his illness and found no evidence of cognitive impairment. He produced correspondence August had written in the weeks before the deed signing that demonstrated in August's own words and reasoning the deliberate and considered nature of the decision. He produced 3 witnesses who had been present at various points during the drafting process and who testified to August's clarity and intention. The case was dismissed. Philippe filed an appeal. The appeal was denied. Marguerite attended none of the proceedings. Etienne had advised this, and she had agreed because her presence would have given the case a character it did not need to have, would have made it about her rather than about the documents, and the documents were sufficient. 2010, the second lawsuit differently constructed. This one argued that the 50-year restriction clause was unconscionable under current property law and should be voided on public policy grounds. It was a more sophisticated argument, and it took longer to dismiss 18 months of proceedings, during which a freeze was placed on certain transactions involving the property that made the hotel's financial management more complicated. Gabriel managed the complications. Marguerite managed Gabriel. The clause was upheld. The restriction stood. 2015, the financial pressure. This was the one that required the most from her, not because it threatened the deed, but because it targeted the quality of her daily life in a way that the lawsuits had not. The Delacroix Family Trust, which had provided a modest monthly income for Marguerite under the terms of August's estate, was restructured in a way that Etienne described as legally questionable, but practically difficult to challenge in the short term. The income stopped. She was 63 years old and had beyond the hotel itself very little. She ate in the staff cafeteria, which she had always done occasionally, and now did regularly. She did not find this difficult because she had never valued the performance of wealth, which was perhaps why August had trusted her with the thing he valued most. She wore the clothes she had. She asked nothing of anyone. What she had was the building around her and the names of the people in it, and the morning coffee in the lobby, and the specific quality of the East Corridor at 4 in the afternoon. Gabriel had once asked her in those years whether she ever regretted it. She had considered the question seriously because it deserved serious consideration. "I regret what it cost," she said. "I don't regret the choice." He had nodded. He understood the distinction. 2008 had brought Colette. She had come alone, which meant she had not told Philippe she was coming, which meant the visit was hers rather than the family's. She was 42, then the age Marguerite had been when she signed the deed, which Marguerite noticed without mentioning. They had sat in the penthouse sitting room with the interior window between them and the lobby below, and Colette had looked around the room with the expression of someone trying to understand a person through their space. She had said, "Why won't you just sell and go? You could live anywhere. You could live well." Marguerite had looked at her. "I made a promise to your father," she said. "He's been dead 14 years, Colette said. "He won't know." "I will know," Marguerite said. Colette had looked at her for a long moment. Not with the hostility Philippe brought to every interaction, not with Sebastian's calculated neutrality, with something more complicated, something that might have been the beginning of understanding, but that had not yet arrived at understanding. She had left without saying anything further. Marguerite had watched her cross the lobby below, pause for a moment at the fountain, and then continue toward the door. She had thought about that pause many times in the years since. Now it was 30 years later, and the lobby was below her, and Gabriel was in the penthouse sitting room, and the safe was closed, and the document was where it had always been. She came back into the sitting room. Gabriel was looking at her with the expression he used when he was concerned, and was managing the concern because he understood that expressing it fully would not help. "Tomorrow," she said. "What are you going to do?" he said. She looked at him. At 61 years in this building, 40 years of its daily life, absorbed into the particular posture of a man who had become over time the building's memory as much as its manager. "What August asked me to do," she said. "What I have been waiting 30 years to do." She looked at the photograph on the table. August in the lobby, amused by the camera, more interested in everything around him than in the image being made. "He built something real," she said. "And tomorrow I am going to make sure it stays real." Philippe Delacroix's office occupied the corner of the 14th floor that received morning light, which he had arranged deliberately when he took the chairman's position, because he understood that light in an office communicated something about the person who occupied it. The office was everything the hotel was not. Where the hotel had been designed with warmth, with the understanding that people who stayed in it were in a temporary state of displacement and needed comfort, Philippe's office had been designed with precision. Glass and steel and the particular emptiness of surfaces kept clear because clutter suggested a mind that could not manage its own materials. The view was the city, which was the correct view for someone who thought about the city as a collection of assets, rather than a place where people lived. Henderson was at the conference table with 2 associates. He was the kind of attorney that large acquisition firms retained for transactions of this complexity, a man in his 50s with the specific economy of movement and expression that comes from spending decades in rooms where unnecessary communication is a liability. He had been reviewing the contract documents for 40 minutes when he stopped at a page and read it twice, and then set it down with the deliberateness of someone who has found something that requires a change in the meeting's direction. Philippe was at the head of the table. Sebastien was to his right with his own copy of the documents, his reading glasses on the posture of a man who has spent months on a transaction and considers its conclusion imminent. Colette was at the far end, which was where she positioned herself in meetings that Philippe was running close enough to be present and far enough to maintain a certain independence that everyone in the room understood and no one discussed. Henderson said the trademark. Philippe looked up. "The Delacroix trademark," Henderson said. "The registered mark covering the brand name as applied to hospitality operations. Who holds it?" "We do," Philippe said. "The company." Henderson removed a document from the folder beside him and placed it on the table and oriented it toward Philippe. "The trademark registration," he said, "lists the holder as Hôtel Delacroix, the original property. The brand licensing agreement, which your other properties operate under, was executed in 1994 and grants the right to use the name on the condition that Hôtel Delacroix remains affiliated with the group and is not sold to a third party." He paused. "Hôtel Delacroix," he said, "is not owned by Delacroix Hospitality Group." The room was very quiet. Sebastien took his reading glasses off. Philippe looked at the document Henderson had placed on the table. He looked at it with the expression of a man who is reading something he recognizes without wanting to recognize it, the specific quality of encountering a familiar obstruction in a context where you had believed the obstruction was behind you. He said her name, not as a question, as the conclusion of a calculation that had taken 30 years to produce its result. Henderson said, The property is held by Marguerite Delacroix under a deed executed in 1994 with a 50-year non-alienation clause. The deed appears to have been legally executed and has survived 2 judicial challenges. For the purposes of this transaction, the trademark cannot be transferred without her consent because the trademark registration is tied to the property she holds. Sebastian said, "We told Hartford we controlled the full asset package." "You control the operating properties," Henderson said. "You do not control the trademark." Philippe said, "Then we get her signature." His voice had the quality it took on when he had moved past the response to a problem and into the management of it, the operational voice, the voice of a man identifying the next task. Henderson said, "That is one approach." "It's the only approach," Philippe said. "She has been obstructing this family for 30 years. She is an old woman living in a hotel that doesn't belong to her in any meaningful sense. We offer her enough money and she signs." Sebastian said, "We've offered her money before." "We've never offered her this much," Philippe said. "There's a difference between offering someone enough to live comfortably and offering someone enough that refusing becomes irrational." Sebastian looked at his copy of the documents. He was running the calculation that he always ran, the one that assessed risk against return, and he was doing it with the particular expression of a man who has run it before and not liked the result and is hoping this time will be different. Colette said, "What if she doesn't?" Both brothers looked at her. She was still at the far end of the table, her copy of the contract closed in front of her, her hands flat on the surface. She was not looking at either of them but at the window in the city beyond it. "What if she doesn't sign?" she said. "What then?" "She will," Philippe said. "You have said that before," Colette said. "In 2003, in 2010. Every time someone told you she would eventually capitulate." "This is different," Philippe said. "The amount is different. The circumstances are different." Colette turned from the window. She looked at her brother with an expression Marguerite would have recognized if she had been in the room, as the expression Colette had worn at the fountain in the lobby in 2008, the expression that was not quite understanding, but was in the process of arriving at it. "She has been in that hotel for 30 years, Colette said. "She has eaten in the staff cafeteria. She has worn the same coats. Philippe has published articles calling her a predator and taken her to court twice and cut off her income. And she has not left." She paused. "What makes you think money is the thing that will move her?" The room was quiet. Henderson looked at his documents with the careful neutrality of a man who recognizes a family conflict and has been retained to facilitate a transaction rather than to resolve one. Philippe said, "Because everyone has a number." Colette said, "Father didn't think so." Philippe's expression changed in the specific way it changed when someone invoked Auguste in a way that Philippe found inconvenient, a tightening around the eyes that was the managed version of something less managed underneath. "Father," Philippe said, "made a decision at the end of his life that has cost this family 30 years of complication. I don't think his judgment on this subject is the relevant standard." Colette looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the city again, at the buildings visible through the glass, at the landscape of a city that contained somewhere in its middle distance a hotel that their father had built from a building he had loved because of what it could become. She said nothing further. Philippe turned to Sebastian. "Call her," he said. "Tell her we need a meeting, urgent." He straightened the documents in front of him with the precision of a man closing a file. "And call our attorneys. Get Brennan specifically. I want him in the room." He paused. This time he said, "We are not going to lose." Sebastian reached for his phone. Colette continued to look at the window. In the hotel, 14 floors below and several blocks away, Marguerite Delacroix was finishing her evening rounds, saying goodnight to the staff coming off the dinner shift, learning that the young man at the concierge desk had just become a father, standing for a moment in the east corridor at the hour when the amber light did what it always did. She did not know about the meeting that had just concluded. She did not need to. She had been waiting for 30 years and she was ready. The hotel was different at night. Marguerite had known this for 30 years, had made a practice of the late evening walk. the way she had made a practice of the morning rounds because a building that serves people continuously has different qualities at different hours, and understanding all of them is part of understanding the building. At night, the lobby held its daytime shape, but emptied of its daytime purpose, the marble floor reflecting the reduced lighting in long, pale rectangles, the fountain continuing its sound into the quiet, the front desk staffed by the night team, who had the particular self-sufficiency of people accustomed to the hours when most of the world is not watching. She started in the lobby. Gabriel walked beside her, which he had done on previous late evening rounds, not because she required company, but because he had long since stopped pretending that his interest in the hotel's condition ended when his official hours did. He had the unhurried quality of a man who has nowhere else he would rather be. She touched the edge of the front desk as she passed the wood worn smooth at the corner where hands had rested for 40 years. She stopped at the fountain and listened to it for a moment. She looked at the ceiling of the lobby, the plasterwork August had restored in 1989 after finding a craftsman in Lyon who still knew the original technique. She said, "Do you remember when the ceiling work was finished?" "October 1989, Gabriel said. August stood in the center of the lobby and looked up for about 10 minutes without saying anything. Then he went to find the craftsman and shook his hand. "He cried," Marguerite said. "He thought I didn't see." Gabriel looked at the ceiling. "I know," he said. "I saw too." They went through the restaurant dark now and set for morning the tables in their overnight arrangement with the chairs inverted. Through the kitchen where the late prep had finished and the surfaces were clean and the equipment stood in its ready configuration. Through the service corridor with its utilitarian lighting and its smell of industrial cleaning solution and the specific functional quality of a space that exists to support the visible spaces without being seen itself. Up to the roof garden. August had planted the roof garden in 1985, had designed it himself with a landscape architect he had argued with productively for 6 months about what should grow at this height in this climate. The garden was not visible. From the street was not advertised to guests, was not a feature. It was private in the way that certain things August made were private made for the making of it, rather than for the recognition. Marguerite stood at the roof's edge and looked at the city. She had stood here many times. The city looked different from 30 years ago, taller, more lit, the skyline revised by construction and demolition and construction again. The hotel was the same height it had always been. It was surrounded now by buildings that exceeded it, which had caused some concern among the board over the years about the property's competitive position, concerns that Philippe had raised and that Marguerite had not been invited to address because she was not on the board. She had addressed them by staying. "Are you frightened?" Gabriel said. She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I have been frightened for 30 years, she said, "but not of them, never of them." She turned from the city and looked at the garden, the rosemary, and the small-leaved plants that survived at this height and that had been here since 1985. I have been frightened of failing August, of being the wrong choice, of reaching this moment and discovering that what I had was not enough. "It is enough," Gabriel said. "Yes," she said. "I know that now." They went back down through the building. In the corridor on the second floor where the portraits hung, she stopped in front of August's. It had been painted in 1987 when he was 65 by a painter he had met at a dinner in the way he met most of the people who mattered to him. August had been a difficult subject, the painter had told Marguerite years later, not because he was uncooperative, but because he was always slightly more interested in what was happening in the room than in the fact of being painted, and capturing a person whose attention is always elsewhere requires a specific technique. The painter had solved it by painting August looking slightly to the left of the canvas towards something outside the frame with the expression he had when he was watching the lobby from the penthouse window. Marguerite looked at him, looking at the thing outside the frame. She said quietly, "Tomorrow." The lobby was empty when they reached it again. The night staff was at the desk and the fountain was running and the east corridor was dark, but she knew what it looked like in the afternoon, had known for 30 years. Etienne Moreau came through the front door at 10:30. He was 75 and walked with a cane that he used with the slightly impatient manner of someone who considers it a concession rather than a necessity. He had not been well for the past 2 years, which Marguerite knew, because she called him every month as she had called him every month for 30 years. He had never suggested the calls were unnecessary. He carried a leather case. She met him in the lobby, and they did not embrace, which was not their way, but he took her hand briefly in the manner she recognized as his form of the same thing. "I brought copies of everything," so he said. "The originals are in my vault, but I have certified copies of the deed, the license agreement, the notarized transfer documentation, and August's correspondence regarding the structure." "You didn't need to come yourself," she said. "I was present when he signed those documents," Etienne said. "I intend to be present when they serve their purpose." Gabriel took Etienne's coat and brought them both to the small sitting room off the lobby, the one Auguste had used for private meetings, the one with the low lamps and the 2 chairs that had been there since 1971, and that fit the room the way things fit when they have been in a place long enough to become part of it. They sat. Etienne placed the document case on the table and did not open it. "He thought about this for 2 years before he executed it," Etienne said. "I want you to know that. People have suggested it was the decision of a man who was ill and not thinking clearly. I was in every meeting. I reviewed every draft. Auguste Delacroix knew precisely what he was doing and precisely why." "I know," Marguerite said. "I know you know," he said. "I'm saying it because tomorrow someone will say otherwise, and I want it to be recent in your mind." She nodded. They heard the front door and looked up. Colette Delacroix Tremblay was standing at the entrance to the sitting room. She was 52 years old, and she was wearing a coat she had put on quickly, the collar not quite straight, and she had the expression of someone who has made a decision before they have finished making it, and has arrived somewhere before they have finished deciding to arrive. She said, "I don't know why I'm here." Marguerite looked at her. 30 years. The small child who had grown up in this hotel, and then grown into someone who had accepted her brother's framing of what the hotel was and what Marguerite was, or had accepted it most of the time, or had accepted it except at the fountain, and except apparently tonight. "You know why," Marguerite said. "You know your father would not have wanted this." Colette looked at the portrait of Auguste visible through the sitting room doorway down the corridor. She said nothing. She did not deny it. She stood in the doorway for a moment longer, and then she left quietly through the front entrance into the night. Gabriel looked at Marguerite. She looked at the doorway where Colette had stood. Later in the penthouse, she opened the safe for the last time before morning. She took out the velvet-wrapped document case and placed it on the table and did not open it because she did not need to open it. She knew what was inside, and she had known for 30 years, and the knowing had been sufficient. She did not sleep. She sat in the chair by the window, the chair where she had drunk her morning coffee for 30 years, and she watched the city in its nighttime state, the lights of other buildings, the movement of the street below, the specific quality of a city in the hours between midnight and dawn, when it is neither what it was nor what it will be. At some point, the quality of the light outside changed slightly, the beginning of the change that precedes dawn rather than dawn itself. She was ready before the sun was. The boardroom occupied the corner of the 14th floor that received morning light. Marguerite had never been in it. In 30 years of living in this building, attending to its daily life with the constancy that Auguste had asked of her, she had been on the 14th floor, twice, both times in the corridor outside, both times for reasons that had not required her to enter the room where the decisions were made, the room where her existence had been discussed and litigated and strategized against for 3 decades without her presence. She arrived at 9 o'clock precisely. Etienne walked beside her. He had stayed at the hotel overnight in the room Gabriel had prepared, without being asked to prepare it, and he had come to the penthouse at 8:30, with his leather case and his cane, and the specific composure of a man who has decided that what he is about to do is the most important thing remaining to him. Gabriel walked behind them. He had no official role in what was about to happen. He had come because she had not asked him not to, and because 40 years in a building creates a loyalty that does not require authorization. The boardroom door was closed. Marguerite opened it herself. The room held 14 people. Philippe at the head of the table in the charcoal suit, Sebastian to his right with the careful expression of a man running calculations, the four Hartford representatives on one side with their documents and their counsel. The Delacroix board members she recognized from the annual reports Gabriel had shown her over the years, faces she knew without knowing people who had operated in the company's orbit for decades, without ever encountering her because she had not been part of the orbit they moved in. Colette was at the far end. She was looking at the table in front of her when Marguerite entered. She looked up when the door opened and their eyes met briefly, and Colette looked down again. But she had come. She was here in this room, which was its own form of information. There was no chair for Marguerite. The table had been arranged for the people expected, and she had not been expected in the way that requires a chair. She understood this was not accidental. Philippe would have known she was coming after the message through Sebastien, and the absence of a chair was a statement of the kind Philippe had been making for 30 years, small architectural assertions of her non-belonging. Etienne set down his case. He went to the side of the room where additional chairs were placed against the wall, the chairs for observers and late arrivals and people whose presence had not been fully planned for, and he took one and carried it to the end of the table opposite Philippe, and set it down with the quiet deliberateness of a man performing an act that means more than its components. Marguerite sat. The room was silent in the particular way of a room full of people who have all made the same recalculation simultaneously and are waiting to see how the new arithmetic resolves. Philippe said, "You're here. Good. Let's be efficient about this." He had arranged his expression into the business register, the register that communicated that he considered the situation manageable. "You know what we're proposing. The Hartford transaction is straightforward and the valuation is fair. For your cooperation, we're prepared to offer—" "I know what you're prepared to offer," Marguerite said. Her voice was the voice she had been using for 30 years in the lobby, the voice that carried without being raised, the voice of someone who has learned that a room listens to certainty rather than volume. She placed the document case on the table. She opened it. She removed the deed first and placed it on the table in front of her, where it could be seen the paper that had aged to the color of old ivory, the header, and the date and her name in the granting clause, visible to anyone looking. She removed the brand licensing agreement and placed it beside the deed. She removed Etienne's certified copy of the trademark registration. She arranged them in order deliberately the way she had arranged the morning desk at the hotel when she was a receptionist 34 years ago, with the understanding that order communicates intention. Henderson, the Hartford attorney, was looking at the documents with the expression of a man who had reviewed them previously and was now confirming that what he was seeing was what he understood it to be. One of the Hartford representatives leaned toward Henderson and said something in a low voice. Henderson nodded slightly. Marguerite said Clause 7.3 of the brand licensing agreement. She did not read from the document. She had read it many times over 30 years and knew its language. In the event that Hôtel Delacroix is sold to a third party outside the Delacroix family, all licensing rights to the Delacroix trademark held by affiliated properties terminate within 90 days. She paused. The Hartford transaction requires transfer of the full brand portfolio. The brand portfolio cannot be transferred without the trademark. The trademark is registered to Hôtel Delacroix. Hôtel Delacroix belongs to me. The room was very quiet. Philippe said, "Marguerite, be reasonable. This is a $3.8 billion transaction. What we're offering you is Zagisnad's." "You called me the wicked widow," she said. The directness of it stopped him. "For 30 years," she said. "In articles, through intermediaries, in court filings, you have described me as a predator, as a manipulator, as a woman who took advantage of a dying man." She looked at him without anger, which seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. "I have never responded to any of it, not once, because responding was not what your father asked of me." "My father," Philippe said, and the register shifted, the business composure cracking at its seam, "made a decision under conditions that—" "Your father," Ma Marguerite said, "spent 2 years designing this structure with Etienne. He was examined by 2 independent neurologists during that period who found no cognitive impairment. He executed the documents with full understanding of what he was creating and why. Etienne was present for every meeting. Etienne, standing to her left, said, "That is correct." Philippe's voice rose. "You have no right to walk into this room and obstruct a transaction that represents 30 years of this family's work. You are not a Delacroix. You were never a Delacroix. You are a former employee who—" "Philippe!" The word came from the far end of the table. "Colette." She was looking at her brother now, not at the table. She had the expression of someone who has made a decision and is discovering in the moment of its expression that the decision was ready before they knew it. "Stop," she said. Philippe looked at her. "Just stop," she said. "Look at what we're doing. We are sitting in this room trying to force a 72-year-old woman to sign over her legal rights so we can sell the hotel our father built to a company that will turn it into apartments." She looked at the Hartford representatives, then back at her brother. "Father built that hotel from nothing. He spent his life in it. He left it to her specifically because he did not trust us to protect it." She paused. He was right not to trust us. The room was quiet in a different way now. Philippe said her name. "He was right," Colette said again. "I have known it for a long time. I have just been too much of a coward to say it." She looked at Marguerite. Marguerite looked back at her. In 30 years there had been no moment between them that felt like this one. No moment when the daughter of Auguste Delacroix and the woman Auguste had trusted looked at each other without the weight of the family's version of the story between them. Marguerite said, "I will sign." The room exhaled. "But not the Hartford contract," she said. She reached into the inside pocket of her coat and removed a document. 12 pages, Etienne's careful drafting the structure they had worked out together over 3 evenings in the penthouse. She placed it on the table. "I will sign this." Marguerite placed the charter on the table and did not read from it. She had worked on it with Etienne over 3 evenings in the penthouse sitting room, going through each provision with the precision that 30 years of waiting had produced, and she knew its language the way she knew the hotel's language from the inside, as something lived rather than something consulted. She spoke it from memory. The room listened. The first provision, Hôtel Delacroix. The original property, its building, and its name and its continued operation as a hotel would never be sold. The restriction that Auguste had placed in the deed would be honored not merely as a legal requirement, but as a formal commitment of the company registered and binding in perpetuity. When the 50-year non-alienation clause expired, the charter would replace it. Henderson made a note. The second provision, the current staff of all Delacroix properties would be maintained at no less than 80% of their present number for a minimum of 5 years, with any reduction requiring review by an independent oversight committee. Severance protections for employees of more than 10 years' service would be enhanced and guaranteed, regardless of any future ownership changes. One of the Hartford representatives shifted in his chair. The third provision, the Auguste Delacroix Foundation endowed from a portion of the company's annual operating profit to fund post-secondary education for the children of Delacroix employees. Named for the man who had started as the owner of a single building and had understood from the beginning that a hotel was only as good as the people who worked in it. Gabriel, standing near the door, was very still. The fourth provision, the composition of the board of directors, would be restructured to include 3 independent members with backgrounds in hospitality preservation and labor relations, and the chairman position would be subject to a performance review by the full board every 2 years. Philippe said, "This is extortion." His voice had the quality of someone who has used the word to mean something serious and discovered in the moment of using it that it doesn't do what they needed it to do. "The fifth provision," Marguerite said. She looked at Colette. "A position of heritage director will be established. Its function will be to protect and maintain the character of the Delacroix properties, to ensure that the decisions made in this room remain connected to the reasons the hotels were built. The heritage director will have advisory authority over any proposed changes to the flagship property and consultation rights on significant decisions affecting the brand." She paused. I am recommending Colette Delacroix Tremblay for this position." Colette looked up. Marguerite held her gaze for a moment. The daughter of August who had grown up in this hotel and had left it, and had come back last night and had stood in the doorway of the sitting room, not knowing why she had come. The woman who had paused at the fountain in 2008 and whose pause Marguerite had thought about many times in the years since. August had built this hotel for his family as much as for anything else. The failure was not in the building, but in what the family had become. Marguerite had been asked to protect the building. She had not been asked to give up on the family. She did not think August had intended her to. Philippe said, "You cannot restructure this board. You have no board authority. You have a deed to one building and a licensing agreement. That is all you have." Henderson said, "Mr. Delacroix." Philippe looked at him. Henderson said, "The trademark issue is not resolvable without Mrs. Delacroix's cooperation. We have reviewed the licensing structure and our counsel's assessment is consistent with what has been presented here this morning. Without the Hôtel Delacroix trademark, the brand acquisition that our transaction requires cannot be completed." He paused. "We are prepared to wait 10 minutes for the family to discuss the matter. After that, we will need to reassess." He looked at his watch. The Hartford representatives did not leave the room. They simply became a presence that the room was now aware of in a specific way, a 10-minute presence counting. Sebastian said, "Philippe?" Philippe looked at his brother. Sebastian had been running calculations for 30 years since before Marguerite had known him, and he ran them now with the expression of a man who has arrived at a result he did not want and has verified it twice and found it consistent. He said, "We don't have a position. We haven't had one since this morning began. Sign the charter." "You cannot be serious," Philippe said. "I am completely serious," Sebastian said. "The Hartford transaction is dead. It was dead when she walked in the door. What we have now is the opportunity to sign a document that preserves the company and keeps the brand intact and does not result in Marguerite withdrawing the trademark license from every property we own." He paused. "If she withdraws the license, we have 90 days. 90 days to rebrand 11 hotels and explain to our investors why the Delacroix name no longer applies to Delacroix properties." He looked at his brother. "Sign the charter." Philippe said, "She has spent 30 years. Sign the charter, Philippe." Colette said, "It's what father wanted." She said it simply without argument as a statement of something she had arrived at and was no longer uncertain about. Philippe looked at his sister. In the silence that followed, something moved across his face that was not the calculation and not the anger, but something older and less managed. The expression of a man encountering a grief he has been refusing for 30 years, the grief of a son who had received a father's estate and had never received his father's trust, and who had spent 3 decades directing at Marguerite the anger that belonged somewhere else entirely. He picked up the pen. His hand was not steady. The signature he produced was not the signature he used for documents he was proud of, but the signature of someone writing under duress, the letters compressed and angular. He set the pen down. Sebastian signed quickly with the efficiency of someone completing an obligation. 2 seconds and it was done, and he set the pen down and looked at the table and did not look at anyone. Colette took the pen. She held it for a moment before she wrote. She signed slowly, deliberately, with the care of someone who understands that what they are signing is not only a legal document, but a different version of themselves than the one they brought into the room. When she finished, she set the pen down and looked at Marguerite across the table with the full directness of someone who has stopped managing the distance between them. Marguerite took the pen. She had been signing her name as Marguerite Delacroix for 30 years in hotel registers and legal filings and the morning rounds book she kept on the front desk, and the name had always carried the weight of something she had chosen under difficult circumstances and had chosen to keep. She signed it now with the same weight, the same deliberateness, the same understanding of what the name meant and what she had done to deserve the right to use it. She set the pen down. Henderson stood. He gathered his documents with the economy of movement that characterized everything he did, and he aligned them in his folder, and he closed his briefcase, and he looked at Philippe. "We appreciate the time," he said. The transaction as structured cannot proceed without the trademark transfer, and it's clear that transfer is not available. We wish the company well." He left. The 3 Hartford representatives and their counsel followed one after another with the quiet departure of people who have been in rooms where decisions have been made against them and who have learned to leave with professional composure. The door closed. The room held Philippe and Sébastien and Colette and Marguerite and Etienne and Gabriel and the 8 remaining board members and the charter on the table, with 4 signatures and the deed beside it, and the particular silence of a moment that has concluded something that has been running for a very long time. Philippe had his head down, not in the way of someone performing defeat, in the way of someone who has run out of the energy that performance requires, who has arrived somewhere they never expected to arrive, and are sitting in it without knowing what to do next. Marguerite stood. She gathered the charter and the deed and replaced them in the document case with the same care she had always used for things that deserved handling. She walked the length of the table. She stopped beside Philippe. He did not look up immediately. When he did, his face had the quality that faces have, when the thing they have been holding has finally been set down, not peaceful exactly, but emptied of a particular kind of effort. She said, "Your father would be proud of you today." He started to say something. She said, "Not because you won. You didn't win. Neither did I. Your father would be proud because you signed something that protected what he built when the alternative was easier." She paused. "That is what he always hoped you were capable of. He told me so." She said it because it was true. August had told her in one of the last coherent conversations they had that he loved his children and knew their faults, and hoped, despite the evidence available to him at the time, that difficulty might eventually produce in them something he could not produce himself. She did not know if this was that moment. She thought it might be the beginning of it. She walked to the door. Gabriel held it open. Etienne followed his cane on the marble floor. She went downstairs to the lobby. 6 months is not a long time in the life of a building that has stood for decades. But it is long enough for a hotel to remember what it is. The restoration work had begun in January, not the renovation that the Hartford transaction would have required, which was the kind of work that prepares a property for transformation into something else, but the quieter and more demanding work of returning something to itself. The plasterwork in the second-floor corridor that had been painted over in 2007 when a cost-conscious facilities decision had determined that restoration was less efficient than coverage. The original brass fittings in the east wing that had been replaced with a modern alternative during a renovation in 2012. The garden on the roof, which had been allowed to simplify over the years, as maintenance priorities shifted, returned now to something closer to what August and the landscape architect had argued productively about in 1985. Gabriel had overseen the work with the focused satisfaction of a man doing something he had wanted to do for a long time and had not had authorization to do. Marguerite had walked through the progress each morning. The lobby in spring was different from the lobby in any other season. The light through the east-facing doors changing quality as the sun's angle shifted the flowers the concierge arranged at the entrance, becoming possible again after the winter arrangements that were beautiful in their own way, but not this way. She stood in the lobby on the first morning that felt fully like spring, and she drank her coffee, and she watched the light move across the marble floor, and she thought about 30 years of this same light and the sameness of it, and what the sameness meant. The first Auguste Delacroix Foundation scholarships were awarded in March, 8 of them the first year to the children of employees across the Delacroix, properties selected by a committee that included Gabriel, 2 independent educators, and Colette, who had taken the selection process with the seriousness of someone who understood that the first year of something establishes what it is. The ceremony was held in the hotel's private dining room, the one August had used for occasions he considered worth the space. Marguerite sat in the back and watched the 8 young people receive the envelopes and watched their parents' faces, and she thought about August saying, "A hotel is only as good as the people who work in it," and she thought that he had understood something that the industry had not always understood, which was that a hotel is also only as good as the people who work in it become. Colette came to the penthouse on Tuesday and Thursday mornings now. She came to learn which she had said directly, and without embarrassment the directness of someone who has decided that the time for managing appearances is finished. She wanted to know what August had seen, what Marguerite had seen, how the decisions that looked small from the outside, the placement of a chair, the routing of a corridor, the particular quality of the light in a room had been made, and why they mattered. Marguerite taught her the way she had learned everything in 35 years as a librarian and 30 years as a keeper of this building, which was by paying attention to what was actually there rather than to what was supposed to be there. They walked the hotel together on Thursday mornings. It had become without either of them naming it a practice. Philippe had stayed with the company. He held a position on the operations committee, which was not the chairmanship, but was not nothing. And he came to the hotel on Wednesdays for the committee meetings, and he moved through the lobby with the particular quality of a man relearning the dimensions of a space he thought he had known. He did not speak to Marguerite directly. She did not expect him to. 30 years of a particular relationship does not resolve in 6 months, and she had not signed the charter to produce a resolution. She had signed it to protect what August had asked her to protect, and the protection was working, and what the family made of itself in the space that protection provided was their own work to do. What Philippe did was nod. Every Wednesday morning, passing through the lobby, he looked at her corner table where she sat with her coffee in the particular quality of morning light that the corner received, and he nodded. A small acknowledgement, the minimum possible gesture that was still a gesture. She nodded back. That was enough. That was in its way more than she had expected from him, and she gave it the credit it deserved. The journalist came on a Friday in April. She was young, which Marguerite had expected, and she had the slightly self-conscious manner of someone who has been given an assignment they find significant and are managing their relationship to its significance. She had done her research, which was evident from the questions she asked, and she had brought with her a printed copy of an article from 15 years ago, which she set on the table between them, with the careful gesture of someone acknowledging something they are not proud of. The headline read, "The Wicked Widow." Marguerite looked at it. She looked at the photograph that accompanied it herself at 57, crossing the lobby in the coat she had worn that winter. Her expression caught in the particular configuration that photographs catch when a person does not know they are being photographed and is simply moving through a space with their own thoughts. The journalist said, "Is there anything you'd like to say to the people who believe that characterization?" Marguerite set the article down. She thought about the question with the attention she gave to things that deserved it. "I don't blame them," she said. "They saw a woman holding something other people wanted, and they assumed the holding was the point." She looked at the lobby, at the morning light on the marble floor at Gabriel, at the far end speaking to the concierge at the fountain August had commissioned from an artist he met at a dinner. "They thought I kept the deed, because I wanted what it represented, the money, the position, the power over the family." She looked at the journalist. "I kept it because of a promise," she said. "And because the person I made it to understood something about this place that no one else in his family understood. He needed someone to protect it." She paused. "Love sometimes looks like selfishness to people who aren't close enough to see what it's actually protecting." She looked out the window. The city below the hotel was doing what the city did in spring, moving with the specific energy of a place emerging from a season, people on the streets in lighter coats, the particular quality of light that April produces in cities that have earned it. "But the truth doesn't require defense," she said. "It requires patience. Someone has to be willing to wait long enough for it to be visible." She looked at the journalist. "I was willing to wait." In the corridor on the second floor later that morning, Marguerite and Colette stood before August's portrait. The painter had captured him looking slightly left of the canvas toward the thing outside the frame. Marguerite had looked at this portrait many times in 30 years and had always known what he was looking at, which was the lobby, which was the fountain, which was the particular quality of the east corridor, in the afternoon, which was the hotel as a living thing that needed someone to understand it. Colette said, "Do you have regrets about the 30 years?" Marguerite looked at August, looking at the thing he loved. "I made a promise," she said. People don't regret promises they kept. They regret the ones they didn't. Colette was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and took Marguerite's hand. The gesture was simple and direct, and carried with it the weight of everything that had not been possible between them for 30 years and was possible now. "Thank you," Colette said, "for not leaving." Marguerite looked at Auguste in the portrait, at the expression the painter had caught, at the slight amusement of a man who is always more interested in what is around him than in being observed. "Thank him," she said. "He chose the right person." She did not know if that was true when she said it. She thought it probably was. She thought about 30 years of morning coffee and names learned and the East Corridor in the afternoon and a roof garden and a fountain and the specific quality of marble floors in lobby light. And she thought that whatever she was, she had been the right person for this, and that being the right person for something is not a small thing, is in fact the thing that makes a life feel like it was the life it was supposed to be. Outside the hotel, the spring continued its work. Inside the building continued its. If you have stayed with Marguerite through everything she carried and everything she kept, then you know that this was never a story about property or inheritance or legal documents, though it contained all of those things. It was about what it means to love something enough to protect it, when protection costs you everything, except the thing itself. It was about a man who saw clearly and trusted carefully and was right about the person he chose. And it was about a woman who made a promise in a room full of afternoon light 30 years ago and walked into a boardroom with it and changed what the promise had always been able to change, which was everything. If this is your first time with Widow's Legacy, there is more here waiting for you. And if you have been with us from the beginning, we will see you in the next one.